600,000 men. The largest army ever assembled. They marched into Russia as conquerors. 6 months later, only 27,000 stumbled back out broken, frozen, barely alive. This is the story of Napoleon's greatest defeat. The one history books barely mention. And the reason he lost will shock you. Everyone knows Napoleon lost at Waterloo. But 3 years before that, something far more catastrophic happened on the frozen roads of Russia. A military disaster so complete, it destroyed the myth of Napoleon's invincibility forever. By 1812, Napoleon had conquered most of Europe. Austria, Prussia, Spain all had fallen. He was 42 years old and seemed unstoppable, but Russia refused to obey him. In 1811, Tsar Alexander broke their alliance and opened trade with Britain, Napoleon's greatest enemy. Napoleon was furious. He decided to invade Russia, crush their army in one massive battle, and force surrender. It seemed simple. He assembled the Grande army, 600,000 soldiers from 20 nations. The finest cavalry in the world. Over 1,000 cannons. On June 24, 1812, they crossed into Russia. The men were confident. They had no idea what was coming. The French expected to meet the Russian army within days. Instead, they found nothing. Empty villages. No food. No people. No enemy. The Russians were retreating using a strategy Napoleon had never encountered: scorched earth. As they retreated, they burned everything: crops, villages, supply depots. They poisoned wells. The French were winning every skirmish. But marching into a desert, July became August. The army marched 20 miles a day in brutal heat. Soldiers collapsed. Horses died by hundreds. Disease spread: dysentery, typhus, starvation. Men were dying before fighting a single major battle. By August, Napoleon had lost 150,000 men. 1/4 of his army gone. September 7th. Finally, the Russians stopped at Borodino, just 75 miles from Moscow. This was the bloodiest single day of the Napoleonic Wars. 250,000 men. 1,200 cannons. For 12 hours, they tore each other apart. Napoleon won but lost 30,000 men he couldn't replace. The Russians lost 45,000 but had millions more. This was a hollow victory. The trap was closing. September 14th, Napoleon reached Moscow. The golden domes glittered. Finally shelter, food, victory. The men cheered. They thought the war was over. When they entered, the city was empty. Nada. Soul. And then the fires started. September 15th. Moscow erupted in flames. The Russians had booby-trapped their capital. For 3 days it burned. 3/4 of the city turned to ash. The food burned. The shelter burned. Napoleon's victory burned. He was trapped 1,000 miles from home with winter approaching. This was Napoleon's biggest mistake. He waited for 5 weeks in the ashes, waiting for Tsar Alexander to offer peace. His generals begged him to leave. Winter is coming, they said. But Napoleon's pride trapped him. He had never retreated. So, he waited. And every day, it got colder. October 19th, finally we retreat, but it was too late. The army was now just 100,000 combat-ready troops. They had 1,000 miles to walk. Winter had begun. And the worst part, the Russians were following them. Cossack cavalry attacked constantly, raiding, stealing supplies, cutting down stragglers. The French were being hunted. Late October, early November. The temperature plummeted, -20, -30 degrees Celsius. Men froze to death while walking. Horses collapsed and were butchered for food. Soldiers burned books, furniture, their own uniforms just to stay warm. Frostbite turned fingers black. Many sat down in the snow and never got up. The horror deepened. When the horses were gone, starving men turned on each other. Historical records document cannibalism. Others went mad from hunger and cold, wandering into the snow talking to ghosts. Then came the Berezina. November 26th. The Berezina River. It should have been frozen solid. Instead, a freak warm spell melted it into rushing, icy water. There were no bridges. Behind them, 3 Russian armies closing in. 40,000 desperate men were trapped. French engineers worked waist-deep in the freezing water building to bridges. Men lasted 15 minutes before hypothermia. Some froze to death still standing. November 26. The bridges opened. 40,000 people. 2 narrow bridges. Absolute chaos. People pushed, fell, drowned, trampled. For 3 days this hell continued. Then the Russians arrived with artillery. They fired into the crowded bridges. People jumped into the icy river and froze in seconds. When it ended, 10,000 more were dead. The Berezina became a mass grave. Napoleon crossed on November 28. Behind him, thousands were trapped when the bridges collapsed. By the time the guns went silent, another 10,000 were dead. 20,000 made it across. Then on December 5 Napoleon did something unforgivable. He abandoned his army. He left them in the snow and raced to Paris in a sleigh. His excuse: I need to secure political power. The men he left behind. They kept walking. December. The final push to Poland. Minus 37 degrees. The survivors were beyond human, filthy, frozen, starving. No longer soldiers. Walking corpses. Many were blind from snow glare. Others had lost feet to frostbite and crawled. Yet somehow, they kept moving. The human will to survive is extraordinary. December 14, 1812. The survivors crossed back into Poland. Of 600,000 men who marched in 6 months earlier, only 27,000 could still carry weapons. Another 20,000 were too injured to fight. 95% casualties. The Grande Army, the largest military force ever assembled, was gone. Destroyed not by battles, but by winter, distance, and patience. The 1812 campaign broke Napoleon's myth. Before Russia, he seemed immortal. After Russia, everyone knew he could be defeated. Within a year, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden joined Russia against him. By 1814, Napoleon abdicated and was exiled to Elba. He would return for Waterloo, but the real defeat, the one that ended his empire, happened in the snow. Here's the haunting part: Russia used the exact same strategy 129 years later. When Hitler invaded with 3 million men in 1941, the Russians retreated. Burned supplies. Waited for winter. History repeated itself. The German army was destroyed in the same snows. Some lessons are written in ice, and conquerors never learn them. So what's the lesson? Sometimes the smartest strategy isn't to fight, it's to wait. To let your enemy's ambition become his weakness. To turn geography and weather into your army. Russia didn't defeat Napoleon in battle. Russia defeated Napoleon with patience, distance, and winter. And in doing so, they changed world history. Because after Russia, Napoleon's days were numbered. Napoleon's greatest defeat wasn't at Waterloo. It was here. In Russia, 1812, a disaster so complete history almost doesn't believe it. 95% casualties, 570,000 men lost. The largest military disaster in history until World War I. One man's pride meeting one nation's patience. This is the story they don't teach in school. But you'll never forget it. If this story shocked you, hit subscribe for more forgotten history. What other disasters should we investigate? Comment below. And if you made it this far, you're a true history fan. Thanks for watching.